Welcome back. In this video, we're going to dive deeper into the user interface of Android Studio. We need to understand what the different aspects of Android Studio can do for us so that we can use it efficiently. There are a lot of buttons, a lot of areas and so forth, and I want to declutter it a little bit for you and make sure that you really understand what the different areas are going to do. But it's really not that much of a problem if you don't memorize all of that after the video. It's really just for you to get a general feel for what the different areas can do for you, because we're going to use them extensively throughout the course and you're going to get very comfortable using Android Studio over time. So if it doesn't happen in the first day or two, don't worry about it. It will definitely happen after a week or two. So it's just something that you just need to use and then you will get more comfortable with it. So let's get started looking at it. There we have our Android Studio. So you can see by default, it's already really simplified in comparison to older versions of Android Studio, I can tell you that. But what we have are a lot of areas. So the first thing that we're greeted with and that we can get rid of is this assistant, which says what's new in Hedgehog. And that's only going to be relevant for you, I believe, if you are a developer who has used Android before or Android Studio before. But if you haven't, then this is not going to be news for you because it's all news, right? If you don't know anything about it, then everything is going to be news. So the latest news is not going to help you too much if you don't understand the older news, so to speak. So you can obviously read through it, but you can also just get rid of it by clicking on this assistant icon here on the right-hand side. So you see there are some other icons. For example, the running devices, the device manager, the Gradle, as well as notifications. So these are things that we're going to use over time. Notifications, for example, tell you how long it took for the Gradle to sync. And what is the Gradle? Well, Gradle, we saw it earlier on at the bottom of the screen when we ran our first project or created our first project. And that is something that is being done every single time when you create a new project or even when you run your application, because it basically is an environment that builds the app so that it can then be used. I'm going to make a little extra video just to give you an idea of what the Gradle is just after this one, okay? But for now, let's look at the user interface a little more. So we have the notifications here, then we have the Gradle, which I said I will give you more detail in the next video. And then you have the device manager, which in our case should be empty unless you have used Android Studio before. You can create a virtual device here. We're going to do that later on, also today still, all right? So then you have the running devices. Obviously, once you have a device connected to Android Studio, it will display here. And the assistant that we just got rid of. We've now gone over the right-hand side of the screen, and that is just because there was this assistant open. Usually how we function, at least in the West, is looking at things from the left-hand side. So let's do that. Here on the left-hand side, we have our project, which gives us an idea of all of the files that are inside of our project. And you can see there are a lot of files automatically created for us. That's because we have chosen this activity blueprint that I was talking about earlier, where now it created this main activity.kt, which stands for Kotlin, which is the extension for Kotlin files. And that's the file that was created for us. And you can see there's already 43 lines of code that we didn't even type ourselves. It was just created for us. And there are some files hidden and so forth. But overall, you can see that inside of our Android project, we have this app, which has a manifest folder in which there's this file called Android manifest XML. We're going to look a lot deeper into it, but basically the manifest holds information about which version the Android application was built for. It holds information about which permissions the application requires. For example, does it need access to the internet, to the file system, to all kinds of stuff that Android is trying to protect apps from using. And then we have the Kotlin and Java folder, which contains our Kotlin code, as well as our UI theme. So there are some more Kotlin files here, the ones that are taking care of how our application is themed. So basically which colors it uses by default, for example, for buttons, for text, and so forth. Then we have our Android test folder as well as our test folder. We're going to look into that a lot later as well. Then we have the resources folder. Here go all of the resources that we want to use in our application, such as drawables, for example, but then also values that we want to use, such as, for example, the language, then the words that we want to use assigned to language and so forth. And then we have this Gradle scripts, which are also a bunch of applications that were built for us with the Gradle by default. Okay, I'm not going to go over it for now. It's way too complicated. You don't even need to understand that all the way until day 20 or so. All right. Then we have this resource manager, which basically manages all of our images and icons and colors and layouts and everything that we are going to build. So you can see by default, we have this IC Launcher background and IC Launcher foreground. And if you were to install this application right now on your phone, the foreground would be put onto the background, and you have this little icon for the app that you installed, which would be a green background and this little droid head, so to speak, on top of it. Then you can go into more tools. I'm not going to go over them for now. It basically allows us to run the application, find stuff, and so forth. This will go way too deep for now. The Logcat, which allows us to look at how our application is running, like what kind of problems arise and stuff. We can actually manually control things that are printed to the Logcat as well, so that we can see where certain problems arise in our application. We can also see the problems that the application directly arises. Then the App Quality Insight, which only works if you connect it. This will also not be something we will need for quite a bit. And then the terminal, which we'll use quite early in the next day, I would say, where we're going to build our first little applications and run them directly via the terminal, or communicate via the terminal. And then you have version control, which allows us to connect our application to Git, to a repository, which is basically like a website where it allows us to store our project in the cloud, and then it allows us to work with other developers together to make sure that we're working on the same version of the application and so forth. And then here at the bottom, you see this long directory where our application is. So we have this folder called My First App. Inside of it, we have the app folder, then the source folder, main, Java, EU, tutorials, My First App, and that's where the main activity is. And that's the file that we have open right now. This is this file here in the middle. Okay, so the My Activity file is inside of this very long folder, and we can go to it. So here you can go open in, show in Explorer, and you will see that there is this folder path where the main activity.kt file is. Then you have the tutorials, EU, Java, main, source, app, and that's where our My First folder is. Okay, and it's inside of our Android project. So you see, I have a bunch of Android Studio projects right here already. All right, so that is what has been built by Android Studio for us. Now, the most important thing where we're going to spend 90% of the time is going to be this area right here where you have your code. And you can see it's quite small. Probably it's a little difficult for you to read. And I'm going to change the size of the font in one of the next videos, but for now I just wanted to give you a general idea of what's up. And then at the top here we have a few more buttons. So for example, this play button, which allows us to run the application once we have a device connected or a virtual machine. But for now you see no devices are connected, so this is where we would see the devices that are connected. Then we have a few more buttons here that we're not going to use for quite a bit. All right, I'm going to go over them once we need to go into more depth. But obviously, if you want to make some changes to your IDE, but for now, I believe that should be good enough. Let's get rid of this little resource manager here on the side as well. So you can see you can toggle it and you have more space for the code, which I will do most of the time because the code is what we are going to focus on most of the time in our project. All right, so this should have given you an overview of what is going on in Android Studio. Now let's look at the Gradle real quick. I'm going to give you a general understanding of what the Gradle is, just a little bit of a story in the next video, and then we can come back and set up our virtual device.